Hello, in week 12 of our World Religions course, we're going to explore the world of cults. This time, cult in the sense of a high pressure, destructive new religious movement. So now we're moving beyond the more general sense of cult as cult classic, devotion and fascination in a broader sense, with anything from the Rocky Horror Picture Show to the movies of Tarantino to The Exorcist to some kind of gaming subculture, um, Dragon Con, whatever. We're talking about full on religious cults this week. How are cults then to be distinguished from religions more broadly? And quite frankly, those who are very cynical about religion might label a lot of religions to be cults. Are they all cults ultimately? Are they all about control and manipulation, um, and lies and authoritarianism? Well, you judge yourself, but we're going to look at some possible hallmarks or criteria for what does and what doesn't count as a cult. I think it's fair to say that these 10 characteristics help us distinguish cults from religion more broadly. That said, I think you could sometimes argue there are cultish um, undertones to forms of religion, even when they're not a full blown cult in themselves. They can at times stray into a cult like behavior or practice. But a full blown religious cult is likely to exhibit some or most of these. Absolute authoritarianism, where the group leader, usually leader, singular, or leadership, is the sole source of truth. So rather than have enduring doctrines that have characterized a group through the centuries, it's about the opinions and the beliefs and the whims of a manipulative, charismatic personality very often. A second characteristic can be cult of personality, that it's the personality of the leader rather than any kind of objective truth apart from that that forms the backbone of the beliefs of the movement. So the leader can say that God has put it on their heart to do something obscene someday, and from then on, that becomes par for the course within that cult. Private revelation to the leader. The leader is the one with a special relationship with the divine, with God, or even is seen to be God. Then lack of financial disclosure. Um, Another characteristic can be an unreasonable fear, paranoia, and hatred with regard to what we might call the outside world. Um, Warning members that the outside world is evil, so that if people try to, as it were, rescue them from the cult, this is basically Satan coming to destroy their prospects within the cult, the demonization of the outside world, and then, of course, any attempt to intervene and to draw a person out of the cult is likely to be interpreted as, oh, it's coming true, they were right. The outside world has come to get me. No good reason for leaving. Cults are often very hostile towards former members, because former members have inside knowledge of the cult, and if they've left, they may not have had the best experience in the cult, and they're likely to be sources of bad publicity. So they'll be demonized, and those in the cult will be told that this person is evil and is going to try to disparage the cult and jeopardize the good thing that they have going on. When people are recruited into cults, cults often indulge in love bombing, where they will shower the recruit with affection and affirmation and maybe even gifts, so as to make them dependent upon this constant affirmation. But that can be quickly replaced with another characteristic whereby suddenly a flaw, some problem is found in the recruit, and they're told that only the cult has the antidote. Um, this person has a problem, and the cult has the solution. So it was meant to be. They were meant to find this cult and be fixed. Another characteristic can be an obsession with the end of the world, with the apocalyptic, and the idea that the end times are coming, and basically everybody else is cooked. The world is screwed, but those within the cult, they're in the lifeboat, as it were. They're going to be rescued, which is powerful motivation to stay with the cult and to see the cult as your means of escape from destruction. basically using fear to keep people in the cult. Also, if people believe that the end of the world is coming, they can be convinced to do almost anything because the normal rules are out the window. The world is about to end, so things that used to matter don't matter now, and all kinds of drastic things can then be justified in a kind of perverse way because it's the end times. A rigid literal interpretation of texts or core writings, whether it be the sacred texts of world religions that are interpreted in a really literalistic, rigid, authoritarian way, or some other form of literature. For example, in Scientology, the science fiction writings of L. Ron Hubbard have become their canon, essentially. And lastly, the sexual manipulation of members, tragically, including children at times. And not every cult does this, but sadly, this is a characteristic of destructive religious cults. It could be anything from Charles Manson or David Koresh as male cult leaders telling their female adherents that God has ordained that they should make themselves available to their cult leader, to put it politely, to other forms of sexual manipulation and abuse. So not all cults exhibit all of these to the same extent, or exhibit all of them, but it's fair to say, I think, that these are the things that set religion in general apart from cults. There is another aspect of this week's materials that you'll notice in the attachment to the weekly email. Is there a danger of using the term cult in too lazy and demonizing a way? I mentioned at the beginning of this commentary that those who are cynical about religion might regard all kinds of religions as cults. So, for example, South American dictatorships, when challenged by the Catholic Church about their violations of human rights, have referred to the Catholic Church as a cult, so as to discredit it. And they can point to things like Catholic religious orders, where monks and nuns and priests, brothers, make vows of celibacy and poverty and obedience to their superior. That can sound cult-like. So the Jesuits and Franciscans and nuns and brothers live in communities. They give up the possibility of getting married and having a family. That can be made sound cult-like. Groups that might be pacifist, Quakers and Amish and Mennonite people who will protest vehemently against war, did so against the Vietnam War. One way to shoot them down is just call them a cult, to ridicule them. People who are adherents of anything from voodoo to Wicca to indigenous religions could be dismissed unfairly as being cults. Related to this, the use of the term extremist or radical also comes into play. We often hear about, if you're keeping up to date on these issues, the radicalization of Muslim youth, for example. That's a trope in the UK news, especially in the city of Birmingham. A great concern that schools had been radicalizing young Muslim people. Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps, yes, if by radicalization we mean a disposition towards violence is being inculcated. But couldn't radical also refer to a devotion to making a religious worldview the center of your life, so everything is informed by it, your treatment of other people? It's not just a Sunday hobby or a hobby for Saturday or Friday, but it's the way you live your whole life. Isn't that radical? And in that sense, wasn't Jesus of Nazareth radical, and the Buddha, and the way that he challenged the status quo of his time, beliefs about suffering? Are many founders of the world religions radical, but not in a violent way, not in a destructive way, but in the way of shaking things up? And extreme. Was Jesus of Nazareth extremely compassionate? And the Buddha, Martin Luther King, perhaps Mother Teresa? So the terms extreme and radical, they also can be used in a very short-sighted and arguably demonizing way in relation to religious people. Does religion have to be middle of the road, vanilla, bland, supportive of the status quo, and not particularly challenging to anybody or anything? Is that what it takes for a religion not to be a cult? So the discussion post will ask you to reflect on that, reflect on what counts as a cult and what doesn't, and is there a danger that some religious movements can be unfairly labeled as cults just because they don't pander to some mainstream beliefs, some lockstep thinking? Um, is it necessarily a bad thing for religion to shake things up and to be challenging? Will you decide for yourself in relation to whatever group you choose to write about in the discussion post? And it'll be absolutely fascinating to see what you think does and does not count as a cult in that sense. Thank you.